She wasn't supposed to be in that car. A storm. A missed ride. A desperate mistake. When Izzy Morgan climbed into the wrong vehicle on a rain-soaked evening, she had no idea the man sitting beside her would change everything. He wasn't a stranger for long, and he wasn't who he seemed. What began as a split-second decision would unravel hidden truths, test loyalties, and pull two very different lives into a collision course neither of them could stop. Because some rides take you further than you ever expected. Before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. The rain came down like glass beads thrown from the sky, sharp and glittering in the yellow wash of streetlights. Isabelle Morgan, soaked through despite her broken umbrella, dodged between puddles with a frantic urgency that bordered on panic. Her once crisp blazer clung to her arms, and the neatly printed resume in her leather folder had long since turned to a pulp of ink and hope. She was late. Not fashionably late. Not even oops traffic late. The kind of late that made a bad first impression impossible to salvage. The cab she had ordered never came. Of course it hadn't. The app was glitching again, and the streets were flooded with people trying to escape the storm. Izzy's fingers trembled as she tried once more, but her screen blinked red. No available drivers in your area. She spotted a sleek black car pulling up to the curb ahead. Her instincts screamed no, but desperation shouted louder. Without thinking, she sprinted toward it and yanked open the door, diving in with a drenched sigh of relief. "Thank God!" she gasped, tossing her bag onto the seat beside her and slamming the door shut. "Please take me to 47th and Pine. Fast. I'll tip double." There was a pause. A long one. Too long. Then came the voice. Low. Calm. Laced with the kind of disdain that didn't need to be loud to cut deep. "This isn't a cab." She froze, turned, and found herself face to face with a man whose presence somehow made the storm outside feel colder. He wore a dark, tailored coat, water beading on the shoulders, his jaw clean-shaven, his hair neatly slicked back. He looked like someone who belonged in an executive suite, not in a back seat with a dripping stranger. Izzy's voice failed her. I thought." His eyebrows lifted ever so slightly. "Clearly." She grabbed for the handle. "I'm so sorry, I didn't. I'll get out." But the door lock clicked, firm and final. He leaned back in his seat, watching her. "You're already inside. And you look like you might drown if I make you walk the next 10 blocks. Her heart pounded. "I didn't mean to barge in. I thought you were, this looks like a black town car? With no taxi light? No medallion number?" He smirked faintly. "You have an unusual idea of what a cab looks like." She blinked at him, unsure if he was teasing or annoyed. Possibly both. The driver up front hadn't said a word. He sat calmly, hands on the wheel, waiting. Julian glanced at him, then at her again. "Where did you say you needed to go?" 47th and Pine, she said automatically. He hesitated, then nodded once at the driver. "Take us there." Izzy stared at him, wide-eyed. "Wait, no, you don't have to, I'll figure it out." But the car was already moving, slipping into the wet chaos of traffic. "Look," she said, turning back to him, "I'm really sorry. You don't even know me. I could be dangerous." That made him laugh. "Just once. Quietly. I think I'll manage." Izzy exhaled, trying not to look like someone who was 2 seconds from either crying or collapsing. She hated how warm the leather seats were. How dry the interior felt. How kind the gesture was, even if cloaked in sarcasm. She looked down at herself. Her skirt was wrinkled, her shirt half untucked, and her hair, well, best not to look. Julian glanced at her sideways. "Interview?" She nodded. "Was." "Ah." He said nothing more. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt oddly suspended, like the moment before a coin hits the ground. After a block or two, he spoke again. "Isabelle, right?" Her eyes snapped to him. "How did you?" He gestured toward her soggy folder, her name barely visible in the running ink. "Oh." She gave a weak laugh. "Right? Probably not the most professional first impression." "I've seen worse," he said. A CFO once spilled espresso down his tie mid-pitch. He still got the job. She raised an eyebrow. "And you were, what, the recruiter?" "No," he said, voice cool. "I own the company." Her jaw tensed. That tone. That certainty. He wasn't bragging. He was stating a fact. "Let me guess," she said, forcing her voice light, "CEO of some Fortune 500? He tilted his head as if considering her. "Close." Izzy rolled her eyes and looked out the window. The city flashed by in streaks of gold and gray. Somewhere in her stomach, a hollow pit of embarrassment remained. "I swear I'm not usually this unhinged," she muttered. It's just been a month. Looks like it. She narrowed her eyes. Wow. Harsh. Not harsh. Observant. She huffed, then glanced sideways. Do you always rescue stray job seekers in the rain? His lips quirked. Only the ones who hijack my car. Another beat of silence passed. I'm Izzy, she said finally quietly. I know, he replied, holding out his hand. Julian Blackwood. The name hit her like static. Recognition fluttered in her chest. Blackwood Industries. Tech real estate. Investment. His face had been on magazine covers, though never smiling. Always composed. Always untouchable. And now he was sitting beside her in the back seat of a car she had mistaken for a taxi. Of course you are, she whispered. The corner of his mouth lifted. You say that like it's a curse. It might be, she said, only half joking. When the car finally pulled up to the sleek high-rise on 47th and Pine, Izzy reached for her bag. Thank you, she said sincerely. Really, I'll never intrude on a stranger's car again. Probably. He leaned forward slightly. You might want to dry off before walking into that building. She paused. I doubt they'll hire someone who looks like she got attacked by a storm cloud. Julian studied her for a moment, then reached into a side compartment and handed her a folded black umbrella. She blinked. You're giving me your umbrella? Consider it a loan, he said. You can return it if this interview goes well. Izzy stepped out, the umbrella opening with a satisfying snap. She turned back, rain pattering overhead. Why did you help me? She asked suddenly. Julian's expression didn't change. Maybe I like unexpected things. And then the door closed, and the car disappeared into the storm. Izzy stood on the sidewalk, soaked, breathless, and holding the umbrella of one of the most powerful men in the city. She didn't know it yet, but that 5-minute ride had just rerouted her entire life. The elevator doors whispered shut behind her, and Izzy stood in the marble lobby of Sterling and Dune, still gripping the umbrella like a lifeline. Her reflection in the black glass was ghostly, half-wet, half-presentable, but she straightened her shoulders anyway. She was here now. And whether or not her resume had melted into unreadable poetry, she wasn't going to walk out without trying. The receptionist gave her a tight smile. Interview candidates to the left, conference room B. Izzy nodded and followed the sleek hallway, heels clicking softly against the tile. The room buzzed with soft conversation. Other applicants sat in chairs along the wall, perfectly dry, polished, glowing with self-assurance. She slid into the last empty seat, stomach churning. As the minutes passed, she tried to compose herself. But all she could think about was Julian Blackwood, the sharp lines of his face, his voice like dark velvet. The fact that she had sat beside him, joked with him, looked him in the eye without flinching even before she knew his name. What was he doing now? Laughing about her with some boardroom of executives? Already forgotten? Isabelle Morgan, someone called. She stood, smoothing her skirt. That's me. A man in a gray suit gestured. Come on in. The interview room was cold. Clinical. 3 panelists sat behind a wide table, flipping through what remained of her documents. One of them raised an eyebrow at the wrinkled page in front of him. Bit of weather out there today, he said. Izzy smiled politely. You could say that. Questions came fast. Background. Experience. Weaknesses. Strengths. She answered as best she could, but each word felt like it landed a second too late. She wasn't making magic, she was just surviving. And then the door opened. Her throat closed the instant she saw him. Julian Blackwood entered without preamble. Suit impeccable. Hair barely ruffled from the rain. He didn't glance at her, just leaned in to whisper something to the panelists. A moment passed. Nods. Quiet agreement. Then one of them cleared his throat. Ms. Morgan, thank you. We'll be in touch. Dismissed. She walked out, every cell buzzing with confusion. The door shut behind her. Julian was nowhere in sight. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving behind the wet shimmer of a city just barely catching its breath. Izzy wandered to the nearest bench and sat down, numb. Her thoughts circled. Was that coincidence or interference? She hadn't even realized she'd pulled out her phone until she saw a message blink across the screen. Unknown number. I believe you have something of mine. Her heart stuttered. Izzy. The umbrella? Unknown number. Among other things. Meet me. 7 p.m. Danton Hotel Lounge. She stared at the screen. It was bold. Unapologetic. Typical of him. And yet she typed back. Izzy. I don't drink with men who don't say please. There was a pause. Then, unknown number. Please. The Danton Hotel rose like a pillar of gold in the city's heart, all velvet armchairs and crystal fixtures that looked like they belonged to old money and whispered scandals. Izzy walked in, her coat draped over one arm, hair finally tamed, and heart beating far too loudly. He was already there, seated in a corner booth, watching her. Umbrella, she said, dropping it onto the table. Julian smiled faintly. You came. I wasn't sure if this was an apology dinner or a setup. Neither. He gestured to the seat across from him. Sit. She did, crossing her legs, meeting his gaze. So, you crash my interview, then invite me to drinks. I didn't crash anything, he said. I own the building. Sometimes I check in. During my interview? Timing is everything. She narrowed her eyes. Did you get me kicked out? He shook his head. No. I made sure they didn't throw your resume in the trash. She frowned. Why? Julian leaned back, the soft lighting catching the faint scar along his jaw. Because you're interesting, and because you didn't pretend I was just another face in the room. Was I supposed to? She said quietly. Most people do. There was a silence between them, thick with everything that wasn't being said. Izzy took a sip of water. You don't strike me as the type who picks up strangers off the street. I'm not, he said. But you didn't ask for anything. You just sat beside me like we were equals. I didn't know who you were. Exactly. Another beat of quiet passed. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded envelope. They offered the position to someone else. Her heart sank. But, he continued, I'm looking for a creative strategist. Not at Sterling and Dune. At Blackwood and Company. It's a temporary contract, but it pays well. She blinked. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a choice. She stared at him, trying to read what was behind those eyes. What he wanted. Why her? What's the catch? Julian's voice dropped an octave. You'd be working directly with me. Izzy exhaled, pulse drumming in her ears. And if I say no, then I'll leave you alone, and you'll never hear from me again. Her fingers curled around the glass, knuckles pale. And yet, something inside her whispered, he doesn't make offers like this twice. All right, she said steady. I'll do it. Julian inclined his head, just slightly. You won't regret it. But in the dim glow of the lounge, with music humming low and strangers laughing across the room, Izzy couldn't shake the feeling that she already had. The office of Blackwood and Company was nothing like Izzy expected. It wasn't cold or minimalist. It was silent. Silent like a museum, like a secret no one was supposed to hear. The walls were matte charcoal, the windows floor to ceiling. No noise, no clutter. Just quiet power stitched into every edge. A woman in heels that didn't make a sound escorted Izzy through a private elevator, down a corridor that curved like a question. Then double glass doors. And beyond them, him. Julian was at his desk, fingers poised mid-gesture over a tablet as if frozen in time. He didn't look up when they entered. You're early, he said. I'm here, Izzy replied. You said 9. It's 8:58. He finally lifted his gaze. Punctual. I like that. He gestured to the leather chair across from him. Sit. Let's talk about what I actually hired you to do. She dropped her bag and settled in. You said creative strategy. I did. But I didn't say for what. He flicked his tablet, spinning it toward her. On screen, a slideshow. Logos. Mottos. Polished brand decks. This, he said, is my newest acquisition. A failing media startup called Wavelength. It had potential. Now it has me. Izzy raised a brow. And me. Julian leaned forward. Their image is fractured. Sales tanking. Investors jittery. They need a fresh campaign. Bold. Disruptive. You have 2 weeks. She blinked. 2 weeks. Deliver something compelling and the job extends. Don't and the contract ends quietly. The challenge was clear. So was the test. Izzy squared her shoulders. What access will I have? Full, he said. Except for me. She tilted her head. Excuse me. You'll work autonomously. I don't micromanage. That was a lie. She could see it in the way his fingers tapped, measured. In the way he'd already read her before she walked through the door. I'll need time with your executive team, she said. He nodded. My assistant Lydia will set it up. And if I ask questions, you'll get answers. Just not always the ones you expect. Izzy held his gaze. I can handle that. Julian's lips twitched almost a smile. Almost? Let's hope so. By the third day, Izzy knew that Blackwood and Company was a world built on control. Schedules ran to the second. Conversations paused when Julian entered a room. No one ever knocked on his office door, they were summoned. And yet, something about it felt strangely familiar. Like an orchestra, everyone playing their part. She just had to learn the notes. She buried herself in Wavelength's data, spreadsheets, social metrics, customer feedback loops. Patterns began to emerge. Stories, missteps, missed opportunities. She stayed long after most left, eating vending machine granola bars and scribbling ideas on notepads like a woman possessed. Julian rarely spoke to her directly, but sometimes she'd catch him watching from his office as she pinned concept sketches to the glass walls. He'd say nothing, just observe, like a storm behind a mirror. It wasn't until Friday evening that he reappeared. Still here. His voice broke the silence, smooth as ever. Izzy looked up, startled. It's only 7. He raised a brow. Only. She gestured at the whiteboard, cluttered with color-coded notes and arrows. This is when things start to make sense. After everyone's gone. Julian walked closer, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the chaos of her work. You see patterns where others don't, he said. I see cause and effect. He tilted his head. You sound like a strategist. I am one. Just not the polished kind with a PowerPoint fetish. That made him chuckle. Low and rare. A sound like wind on concrete. May I? He asked, nodding to her marker. She handed it over. Julian stepped to the board and circled a single phrase she'd written in red. The pulse behind the noise. This, he said. This is your hook. Izzy stared at it. You think it works? He turned to her, closer than he'd ever stood. It works because it's real. Not clever. Not corporate. Real. There was a silence between them then, not awkward, but heavy. Full of things unspoken. You surprise me, he said quietly. You make it sound like that's rare. It is. Later that night, Izzy exited the building to find her phone buzzing. A message from Lydia. Julian asked me to tell you your car is waiting. He insists. She frowned. He hadn't said anything. But sure enough, a sleek black vehicle idled at the curb. As she approached, the window rolled down. Julian was inside. Izzy stopped. You said you don't micromanage. He smiled faintly. Consider this an exception. She slid in beside him, rain dotting the window glass once again. The world outside moved in streaks of color and blur. Where are we going? She asked. I thought you might like dinner, he said. Real food. Not trail mix from a vending machine. She didn't respond right away. Then, are you always this cryptic? Only when I'm trying not to scare someone off. And why would you scare me? Julian turned, eyes unreadable. Because I don't do this. Not with employees. Not with strangers. But I can't seem to stay away from you. Izzy's breath caught. Outside, the city lights flickered like warning signs. Inside the car, her world tilted just slightly off its axis. The restaurant was tucked into the side of a building with no sign, no crowd, and no menu in the window. One of those places you only found if someone like Julian Blackwood showed you the way. Inside, it was candlelight and dark velvet booths. The quiet hum of a jazz trio in the corner. No paparazzi. No executives. Just soft anonymity. Izzy stood in the entryway, her heels clicking against the tiled floor, uncertain. Julian handed his coat to the host like it was a ritual he'd performed 1,000 times. Then he turned back to her. You're safe here, he said. From what? She asked, half smiling. He didn't answer. Not directly. Just nodded toward their table, and she followed. They sat in a booth near the back. The table was already set. Wine glasses half full. A flicker of flame dancing between them. Do you bring a lot of employees here? She asked, folding her napkin. I don't bring anyone here, he said. The implication settled between them. She studied him as he loosened the cuff of one shirt sleeve, as if uncomfortable with the quiet formality surrounding him. Why did you buy Wavelength? She asked. Julian tilted his head. Because it was broken, but salvageable. That's a metaphor, isn't it? She said. He didn't deny it. She looked down at her hands. I think I know why you really hired me. Oh, you want a buffer, she said. Someone outside your echo chamber to say the things your team is too afraid to voice. He watched her. You make that sound like manipulation. I make it sound like survival. Julian's eyes flickered. You see more than most. Izzy leaned forward. So do you. A beat of silence passed. Then, quietly, what broke you? She asked. The words escaped before she could stop them. Too forward. Too honest. He didn't flinch. Just looked at her. Long and unreadable. Do you always ask strangers that? I don't usually have dinner with them either. His smile faded. A long time ago, he said. I made a decision I thought was right. Cost me someone I loved. Since then, I've been careful. Careful. Not cold. Not cruel. Just worn down by consequence. She looked at him differently now. Not as the man in the tower, but as someone still haunted by what he lost in the fall. I'm sorry, she said. Julian nodded once. So am I. Their food arrived, delicate, beautiful. She barely touched hers. Afterward, he walked her to the car. The sky had cleared, the city glowing like a promise through wet pavement. They stood beside the door, neither quite ready to say goodbye. Thank you for dinner, Izzy said softly. He nodded, but his eyes stayed on her. There's something about you, Isabelle. Let me guess, she said, forcing a teasing tone. You don't usually say that either? He stepped closer, the night folding around them. You make me want to believe in timing again. Her heart stuttered, but she didn't step back. You're not supposed to say things like that to your strategist, she whispered. I know, he murmured, but I can't help it. He didn't kiss her, but his gaze did. It lingered in places that felt like touch. Then he stepped back and opened the door. Get some rest, he said. You'll need it. The next morning, Izzy walked into the office with her mind still spinning. The city felt louder somehow, more alert, and yet nothing in Julian's building had changed, except maybe the way she saw it. At her desk, a new folder waited. No note, just her name in clean print. Inside, reports, confidential memos, emails, all connected to Wavelength's downfall. But buried in the back, she found something odd, a single unsigned document, heavily redacted, with Julian's name faintly watermarked across the top. Before she could process it, Lydia appeared at her desk. Mr. Blackwood's asked to see you. Izzy blinked. Now? Lydia nodded. Boardroom. When she entered, Julian stood by the tall windows, arms folded, back to her. The skyline stretched out like a painting behind him. You read the folder? He asked. Most of it, she said, including the strange part. He turned. The redacted file. Yes. What is it? Julian walked to the table and tapped the surface beside her. It's what nobody else is supposed to see. Not yet. Her heart thudded. Then why show me? Because you're not like them. And because you're smart enough to know what you're holding. I'm not sure if that's a compliment or a warning, she murmured. Julian's eyes were sharp now, but not cold. It's both. That night, Izzy sat in her apartment, staring at the file again. The redactions hinted at something bigger, someone pulling strings behind Wavelength's crash. Someone internal. And Julian's name was attached not as a rescuer, but maybe as a last line of defense. What had he walked into when he bought the company? Or worse, what had she walked into? Her phone buzzed again. Julian. Come to the balcony. She startled. Then realized she hadn't closed her curtains. Across the street, in the penthouse of the building opposite hers, a single figure stood behind glass. Julian. She stepped to the window, heart racing. He raised a hand. Somewhere between shadow and neon, something had already changed. And the only question now was whether it could be undone. The next morning began with a storm. Not outside there, the sky was clean and pale, but in her inbox. 3 flagged emails. 2 marked urgent. One titled, Inquiry into Wavelength Asset Losses. Izzy read them in silence. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, hesitant. There were numbers that didn't align. Transfers that vanished. Partnerships that didn't exist until right before the collapse. And woven through them all, an offshore account tied to an alias that felt too deliberate. She leaned back in her chair, heart-thudding. Julian had handed her the threads, but hadn't said what they led to. Now she wasn't sure if she was supposed to pull them. At 10:12 a.m., Lydia buzzed her phone. Mr. Blackwood would like a word. Izzy entered his office without knocking. She was past the point of protocol now. You knew, she said. Julian looked up from his desk, unbothered. I suspected. Then why involve me? He stood slowly, like a storm gathering weight. Because no one else would ask the right questions. Or have the nerve to confront me with them. She crossed her arms. So I'm your filter? Your conscience. You're my counterbalance, he said. You see what I can't. She shook her head. No. You do see it. You just don't want to face it alone. His jaw tensed. But he didn't deny it. Julian walked to the window, the glass reflecting a distorted version of the man behind it. When I acquired Wavelength, I thought I was saving it, he said. But someone inside was already gutting it for parts. I needed to know who. And I needed someone who didn't owe me anything to help find them. You think I don't owe you anything? Izzy asked softly. He turned. Not yet. Later that day, she met with the Wavelength team under the guise of a creative debrief. The tension in the room was sharp, coiled. They smiled, but their eyes moved too quickly. She watched every twitch, every hesitation. A man named Darren, operations lead, kept checking his phone. Another, Krista from strategy, barely looked at her notes. And then there was the intern, quiet, sharp-eyed, who lingered a beat too long when Izzy mentioned asset reallocation. She made mental notes, traced patterns. And when she left the room, she didn't go back to her desk. She went to IT. I need access logs for internal file downloads over the last 2 quarters, she told the tech on duty. He blinked. Are you cleared for that? She lifted her badge. Julian Blackwood says I am. The results came an hour later. One device name popped up repeatedly, DKR001. Darren's initials. But the files he accessed weren't just internal reports. They were financial statements Julian had personally sealed. That night, she walked through Julian's penthouse for the first time. He opened the door like he'd been waiting. No words. Just that look. The one that asked things without speaking. She held up a flash drive. You were right. He took it from her. Turned it over between his fingers. Darren? He asked. She nodded. He's been bleeding Wavelength dry. Then feeding it to shell companies. My guess? He wanted it to fail. Sell it back to his own network cheap. Restructure. Profit. Julian's eyes darkened. He played a long game. He almost won. She waited for him to say something. To explode. To pace. But he just looked tired. I'll handle it, he said quietly. You're not angry? I'm always angry, he said. But I've learned to fold it into silence. He gestured toward the living room. Sit. You've earned something stronger than coffee. They drank whiskey in silence. City lights bled into the windows, fractured by raindrops that hadn't been forecast. I lied to you once, Julian said suddenly. Izzy looked up. When? The night I drove you home. I said I couldn't stay away from you. She frowned. That wasn't true? It was more than that, he said. I didn't want to stay away. She felt her chest tighten. There's a difference? He met her gaze. Wanting something is dangerous when you're used to breaking everything you touch. Maybe not everything breaks, she said. His hand brushed hers, tentative. Don't test that theory with me. But she didn't pull away. The next morning, Julian fired Darren Blackwell. The news exploded inside the office like thunder. Emails flew. Security escorted him out before lunch. And through it all, Julian said nothing. He watched. Waited. Only when the glass door closed behind Darren for the last time did Julian speak to Izzy. You just saved my company. She shook her head. I didn't do it for the company. His eyes searched hers. Then why? She hesitated. Because I believe in building something that doesn't have to be torn apart. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, what if I asked you to stay? Her heart leapt. Stay how? At Blackwood. As something more than temporary. More than a strategist. She swallowed. What exactly are you asking? Julian stepped closer. That depends on whether you're ready for what comes with me. Izzy's voice barely rose above a whisper. What has come with you? He smiled. A real one this time. Soft. Vulnerable. Everything I've been afraid to offer. The office had changed. Not visibly, no one moved furniture, no walls were painted, but the energy was different. The silence was now layered with awareness. People watched Izzy when she passed. Some with curiosity. Some with calculation. She had become visible in a place built on anonymity. And Julian hadn't said a word about what had passed between them the night before. Not a text. Not a call. Nothing. She buried herself in the final phase of the campaign. The board review was in 4 days. She had a pitch to polish, analytics to lock in, and more media content to deliver. But focus became harder to maintain. Because every time she passed Julian's door and saw the light on, she felt that tether again, tight, invisible, undeniable. Until Thursday night. The hallway was dark when she returned for her forgotten laptop. The office mostly empty. But Julian's door was ajar. He was still there. Standing alone. A glass in his hand, staring at something on the monitor. She hesitated. I know you're there, he said without turning. She stepped inside. You always the psychic? No. Just familiar with your footsteps. She stood silently. Then, are you okay? He didn't answer. Just poured another drink and pushed a second glass toward her. I got a call today, he said finally. From someone I haven't heard from in 3 years. Izzy waited. My father's lawyer. Her heart stopped. You've never mentioned your family, she said. That's because I never wanted to become them. He walked to the far end of the room, hands in his pockets. My father ran Blackwood before me. He built it with charm and destruction in equal measure. People admired him. Others feared him. But none of them really knew him. Julian turned back. Except me. Izzy crossed her arms. What did the lawyer want? To tell me he left something. A letter. Some kind of confession. But it came with a condition. What kind? Julian laughed dryly. I have to open it with a witness. Someone not involved with the company. Someone I trust. He looked at her. Not a question. A request. You want me to be there? She asked softly. I shouldn't. It's personal. And maybe dangerous. But yes. She didn't hesitate. Okay. He blinked. Just like that. Just like that, she said. You've been carrying something heavy for a long time. Maybe it's time you let someone carry it with you. The lawyer's office was a fortress of glass and wood tucked inside a quiet midtown building. Izzy sat beside Julian at a polished table that reflected the clouds outside. Across from them, an older man in a navy suit placed a single envelope between them. This was delivered by hand, he said. And it's never been opened. We've verified it. Julian reached out, fingers steady, and broke the seal. The letter was handwritten. 2 pages. As he read, his expression changed: confusion, anger, something like grief. His shoulders tensed. His jaw locked. Izzy watched, silent, unsure if she should move. When he finally looked up, his voice was raw. He admitted it. What? He orchestrated Wavelength's collapse from the inside. Before I even bought it. He planted Darren. The shell companies. Everything. Izzy's breath caught. He knew I'd come in and try to fix it. He wanted to test whether I'd spot the rot. Whether I deserved the company at all. She whispered, that's psychotic. Julian's eyes were dark. That's legacy. Back at the penthouse, silence hovered between them like fog. Why would he do that to you? She asked, voice small. Because he didn't believe in inheritance, Julian said. Only survival. He poured himself a drink, then stopped. No, he muttered. That's what he would do. Instead, he turned to her. Sat down. I need to change how this company runs, he said. Not just the structure. The culture. I can't keep pretending I'm a ghost in a corner office. You're not, she said. He looked at her, and for a second, the guard dropped completely. I'm scared, Izzy. She didn't answer. Just reached for his hand. You're allowed to be, she whispered. But not alone. In the days that followed, things moved fast. Julian released a statement. Quiet, deliberate, but clear, Blackwood and Company would begin internal restructuring. Audits. Leadership changes. External consultants. People gasped. Investors stirred. But more importantly, employees watched him differently now. With caution. With curiosity. Maybe even respect. Izzy continued to work. She restructured Wavelength's voice. Crafted a brand campaign centered not on perfection but on transparency. The pulse behind the noise. Julian read her final deck and said just 3 words, you nailed it. Then he closed the folder and looked at her. I'm stepping back, he said. Izzy's heart jumped. From what? From day to day. From being the face. I need people who aren't haunted by my name to rebuild what comes next. She stared at him. Where will you go? I don't know yet. He hesitated. But I want to know if you'd come with me. Later that night, they stood on the balcony. Below them, the city buzzed, oblivious. Above them, stars finally poked through the haze. You terrify me, Izzy said, not turning. Julian stepped closer. Why? Because I don't know where this ends. And I don't want to fall for a man who disappears when the weight gets too heavy. He was silent for a moment. Then, I don't want to be the man who disappears. She turned, met his eyes. I'm still scared, she whispered. So am I, he said. And this time, when he kissed her, it wasn't an apology or a promise. It was permission. The campaign launched on a Thursday. It went live at midnight, just as the city exhaled into sleep, and by morning, Wavelength was trending. Not for its polish, not for its perfection, but because people saw something they hadn't expected from a Blackwood project. Vulnerability. The pulse behind the noise became more than a tagline. It became a statement. And Izzy Morgan, once the girl who jumped into the wrong car, was suddenly everywhere. Mentions, features, interviews, They asked about strategy, about her process, about Julian. To all of it, she gave the same calm, practiced smile and said, "This was never about me. It was about listening." But behind the scenes, her world was shifting again. Julian kept his word. He stepped back. The board wasn't happy, he didn't care. He handed power to people he trusted, and for the first time, he let the company breathe without his shadow. And then he left. Not in scandal, not in silence. He left a letter. One for the board. And one for Izzy. She found it tucked under her apartment door the morning after the launch, written in his precise, slanted hand. "Isabelle, I could have called. I could have knocked. But that wouldn't have been us, would it? I'm leaving the city for a while. Not because I'm running, but because I finally know I need to live without controlling every piece of the board. And because you deserve someone whole, not someone watching from behind a mirrored wall. If I'm lucky, you'll still be curious when I call again. You once told me not everything breaks. You were right. Jay." She read it 3 times. Then folded it slowly like it might disappear if she looked away too quickly. He didn't say goodbye. Weeks passed. Izzy kept working. She took on new clients. Gave 2 talks. Visited her mother in Oregon. Even bought new headphones because her old ones stopped working during a rainstorm and she didn't like how quiet the city sounded without music. But she never stopped thinking about him. Not in the loud, cinematic way. In the quiet, real way. The way someone lingers when they've touched something deeper than charm or circumstance. Then one evening, an email. Subject: "Still believe in timing?" No name. No signature. Just a location, the corner of 3rd and Barclay, 8 p.m. She almost didn't go. But she did. She wore no makeup. A coat that still smelled like city wind. She waited 5 minutes, then 10. Then he stepped out of the shadows. Not in a suit. Not polished. Just Julian. With tired eyes. A faint smile. And a question in the shape of a man. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I wasn't sure you'd ask," she replied. They stood there on the corner, the city moving around them like it didn't care. But Izzy did. And so did he. "So," she said. "What now?" Julian held out his hand. "We find out." They drove nowhere that night. Just moved through the city, windows down, air cool against their skin. No titles. No roles. No legacy hanging like chains. Just the sound of wheels on pavement and the knowledge that sometimes the story doesn't start when you plan it. Sometimes it starts with the wrong car, the wrong time, and the right person. Izzy looked at him and he looked at her, and for once, neither of them was afraid of what came next.